Welcome to Night Vision Radio with your host, Renee Barnett.
I want to get right on to the subject at hand for tonight. My guest tonight is a physicist and an author and an engineer, and he's done something really interesting with, and he's recorded it all in his book. His book is called "We Are Not Alone in the Universe." His name is Konrad Kulczyk, and he has basically theorized that about the events, I'm not going to give it away just yet, but about the events in Fatima in 1917. And we'll go through those events, just a brief reminder of what those were when I bring my guest on, and then we'll find out exactly what he's figured out about those events. And he's got some great evidence for it, and we're going to hear about it. But first, let me welcome you, Konrad Kulczyk, to the show. Hello, Mr. Kulczyk?
Oh, there you are.
Hi, there you are. I was talking too long. I think I bored him to death.
No.
I'm
Good
so
evening,
sorry.
Renee. Good evening, everybody.
How are
I'm very
you?
pleased to be on your show, and obviously waiting your questions.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and I am so glad that you could join us, and thank you for sending me the ebook. I'm really enjoying getting into it, and I'm also looking forward into getting the hard copy of the book, which I know is on its way, and it's fascinating. But before we get into your analysis of the events, maybe we should just remind everyone what those events actually entailed. It was a series of events actually that occurred in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, where what we commonly call, a Marian apparition apparently at that time occurred in front of 3 children, and then foretold coming events that I guess culminated in a large event that was then witnessed by 50,000 people. And so, we hear about these Marian sightings, Konrad, but there were some peculiarities about this particular series of events that kind of make it a little bit different than some of the other Marian sightings around the world, or the Marian apparitions that we've come to call them. Can you sort of tell us a little bit about the events in Fatima and why they were so different?
Well, yes, we call a sort of Marian apparition. And because of this, we could say, oh, well, they were very much similar to any other Marian apparition. But was after the apparition, people witness, we call it display in the sky, or we call it in the literature the miracle of the sun, when, people believe that the sun sort of started dancing, rotating, jumping up, and falling down to earth. And as we mentioned, this display was observed by 50,000 people, which was quite sort of a very much unique experience. And because so many witnesses, I have to get a little bit of history, basically why I was interested, because really I was not interested really in apparitions as such. However, when I was in Portugal, I managed to read a book by a historian who described events in Fatima from quite different point of view. I mean, she studied the Fatima archive, which includes statements of hundreds of witnesses. And she presented completely a new view of Fatima, which was not really widely known to the public. So when I really read the book, and which is well documented, I realized that this display in the sky was a very unusual event. And being, as I mentioned, physicist, and I work in laser application for many years, it struck me straight away that this looks to me like a laser display. So that started really my interest, in this event. However, there is also another part to it why I obviously started further investigation, because what came to light is that the events in Fatima were predicted, and they were predicted almost 2 months before the event, and they were predicted in Portuguese newspapers. The other way, the advertisement was printed giving a date, which was 13th of May 1917, and you can see this advert if you go and see the copies of newspapers in the library. So it's not any hoax, anything like this. That's
Sure.
the truth. So so having something being so well documented, obviously really started my interest and started really my work on it.
And now this prediction of these events came about in kind of a strange way, didn't it? I mean, wasn't it a spiritualist that was practicing a method called automatic writing that was predicting these events? The actual prediction of the first event had nothing to do with the children, isn't that correct?
That's right, yes. Obviously that time, because it was, I would say, 2 months before, it was a group spiritists in Lisbon. Basically, they received a message, another way, a medium received a message and started writing. Well, message was a bit mystical and obviously was not clearly stating what's going to happen, but definitely indicated the date of some very important event in Portugal. So therefore they, people obviously present during this show, they decided to put this advertisement in the newspaper because they thought that it's worthwhile to announce this. So yes, the message, the media who received the message, yes, those wrote down the message. This was, as you say, the inverse sort of writing. Obviously, it was easily decoded. So the first part was also quite unusual. That the first information about Fatima, did not go to, let's call it, the church circles or institutions, as we would call it, but to spiritists. So I believe because obviously this media have some ability to receive communication.
Sure.
This is sort of obviously we're looking. Well, we could say I don't want to say what type of communication, but was obviously some directly communication directly to their mind. So that's. I
get where sort of where you're headed with that, and I was so interested once I sort of already knew what your concept was in what you thought was at play here, and basically the explanation could be that there was some type of intervention from, if it wasn't a religious event and it wasn't a man-made event, then it was manipulated by someone other than Earth human beings. Because if it wasn't a divine event, then the only other explanation would be someone from off-world or extraterrestrial. And what I started then, sort of when I started reading the book, sort of backing into that theory because of the way that the apparitions appeared. There were some features that were very interesting that some of the people described. For instance, some people described a ramp of light that this figure sort of descended down, that looked like it was extending back from the figure up into the clouds. and it put into my mind, like when you go to especially, I don't think you see it so much nowadays, but the old movie theaters with the projectors, and you'd see that sort of ramp of light, headed down toward the screen, if you looked back up through the theater, and it sort of reminded me of that. So basically, can you just tell us what your theory is, and then sort of how you came to it, what the evidence was for that?
Well, if we concern obviously apparitions, the evidence only arrived from the children. Also was one witness who claimed, this is, well, okay, I'm very critical. This is, you have today. So basically, I do not take into account the statements from one witness.
Sure.
But definitely children could see, well, they call it lightning. Obviously, they couldn't see anything else, but seeing lightning, and this lightning was moving towards them every time before the apparition. So therefore, we can assume there was a beam of light coming, slowly coming. Obviously, if you see lightning, it was not like just a fraction of a second. So it was slowly beam coming until came on the top of the tree, and after this, a figure of the lady appeared above the tree. So, this would indicate obviously the first, indication there was something optical projection. But what I found, hidden in the description, that part of the tree was effectively slightly burned. This was well recorded, that sort of like a circle about a foot in diameter was on the top of the tree was burned out. So it was no doubt there was a physical contact, in other words, was physical energy used to provide this display.
Yes. And would that be indicative of a laser?
Well, yes, I think. Well, this is obviously I'm coming to a technical description, but
sure.
One was important part is that when you have an optical display, you need a sort of like a screen, which normally, nowadays we use clouds for example to display laser beam in the sky.
Yes.
So they then generate this sort of a mini cloud that people notice a small, I call it clouds of smoke coming above the tree. So on this cloud, or call it mini clouds, was really shown this projected image. But this cloud was really obtained by sending, I call it infrared beam, which was hitting the tree, releasing this water from the tree, and this is why was sort of water evaporating helped to generate, obviously, this image.
And help to generate the cloud in order to project the image onto the cloud, right? Or
well, yes, because we're talking about this happened around the noon, and you're talking about a very bright sunshine. So it is very difficult to generate picture or image, optical image in such a bright environment. In cinema, you have to turn the lights down when you watch the screen. So, the reason, so therefore, if there wasn't this cloud, the picture of the lady would not be very strong and very sharp. Would be sort of like almost you could see through them.
Right.
But another indication was that the figure of a lady was radiating very bright light. And this is also indication why it was artificial. It was so bright light that children complain. They think, well, they have to lower their eyes or they have to rub their eyes. We were so tired. So it's no doubt, again, there was a physical discomfort they suffer by simply watching the lady. So it's no doubt that it was not any hypnotic transmission. It was purely physical transmission of the image.
And I know that one of the ideas, you just said the picture of the lady, and indeed you do assert that it was a picture, because indeed when the lady spoke, the mouth did not move. It was like a static image, and then this voice sort of emanated from somewhere in the vicinity of the image, I'm imagining. But was that one of the reasons that you felt like it might be a projected picture, because there was no actual movement of the mouth when she was speaking to the children?
Well, yes, she was really looked like a doll. She was 3'8" high, so it was really more like a figure of Virgin Mary in a church, for example.
Right.
And she didn't move her hands as well, although there was slight movements, but in general was sort of like a almost artificial figure. When she arrived and was leaving, she didn't move her legs, so it was sort of like floating through the sky. So everything, was so artificial, and also I would call it almost so primitive. I mean, nowadays we would be able to organize almost a much better laser show. This is why it's a key probably conclusion. The present technology is sufficient to arrange this type of show, and maybe much better quality of show than was really, shown in 1917. So therefore, we're not talking about our supernatural technology, supernatural event. It is a very crude technical display, almost, I would call it.
And in your, like now, as I hear, I know a lot of special effects people. We live out here, in Hollywood, and in Jeff, my producer, and I both work in the industry, so we know a lot of people that can do a lot of these things. And I understand one of the things that's very easy to do these days, according to those that are so inclined, is to create holograms and holographic images. So you're saying, was this like an early hologram? And then it's strange, I guess, thinking that, if you're talking about extraterrestrial beings, and even in 1917, we would have felt like, oh, gee, anyone that could come here and be traveling back and forth these distances and have the technology to do that, why would their technology for creating an image be so crude, even back in 1917? But I guess they're evolving just like any other species would. And
well, yes, this is rather difficult to answer, because I think that the projection was really prepared only for children, and the children really, were they were assuming that they were so thrilled by having, seeing the Virgin Mary, they would not notice these details. Unfortunately, Lucia was a very observant girl, and she described a lot of these details, and because of this we have a better feeling and understanding really what's happened. So yes, also there's a lack of synchronization between, let's call it, picture and sound. It was quite visible, but as I mentioned, to do proper synchronization in Portuguese language might require quite a lot of work or technology. So definitely there was no proper synchronization. Therefore, conclusion is that technically the display was not perfect, therefore could not be divine. I mean, nowadays we could do obviously much better show than they done obviously that time.
Right, yeah. If it was divine, one would think that, the lady would be moving and speaking and, bending down toward the children and that sort of thing. But it was just basically a flat, static image. Did it appear to be three-dimensional?
Probably, well, difficult to say, because obviously children They didn't move, therefore they couldn't see. They were always standing in the same position. As I was saying, the figure was so bright they could hardly see details of the face or clothes. That was always very difficult to confirm, really. So yeah, no, it's difficult to say. Maybe it wasn't even. Maybe it wasn't. I mean, yes, holography would produce a good quality, let's call it picture display, three-dimensional display. Therefore, I did not postulate that it was a holography. It was maybe something much cruder, almost like a two-dimensional display.
Right. I see. Yeah, that's the way I'm envisioning it from your description in the book, which was taken from a lot of descriptions that were given, I guess, in the notes from the time. But now there was something interesting too, and I'm not sure what year this was, but I know you were telling me about this earlier, and then I was reading more about it, that in the churches, I guess, moved toward sort of giving this legitimacy as a divine event, or was it maybe for the beatification of one of the children? I'm not sure which. You can correct me there, but Pope Benedict, who at that time was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, was very, very adamantly against sort of ratifying this as a divine event. And in fact, when the Vatican was moving toward that, he actually tendered his resignation to Pope John Paul, but the Pope refused to accept it and did not accept his resignation, and so therefore, obviously he stayed on because now he's Pope. But you conclude from that, or a possible conclusion that you're drawing from that, is that he knew that these events were not divine. If he knew they were not divine, he must have had some idea of how they were actually achieved. And so you believe that that's evidence that he knew that there were extraterrestrials and that the Vatican has evidence, possibly.
Yes, well, the church attitude to Fatima was, at the beginning, was very hostile. I mean, we have to start with the parish priest, who really was hostile, to all the description. And, well, in his opinion, it was, well, obviously simplified, was a devil's work. So, and he received description straight after the apparition from the children. So that is obviously his attitude was followed by quite probably many people within the church. But you have to understand that there was a huge pressure from the public. I mean, in Portugal, because of this 50,000 people witnessing this. And obviously, conversion of Portugal back into Christianity. This is a very important event in Portugal. So I think church couldn't have any other way. We have to accept that this was a divine apparition. But obviously, Cardinal Ratzinger had access to all the information, to book written, to witnesses' statements. I'm sure that he done very thorough job. Probably he done this good job before this historian wrote her book about this. So he knew about this. So that's why was his, let's say, hostile attitude, and also it's not only his. It was, I understand, it was they call the anti-Fatima establishment in Vatican. So yes, this would support, not directly, but would support my hypothesis that it was extraterrestrial event rather than divine event, or obviously couldn't be man-made event and couldn't be a natural event.
And what about these controversial? Well, they're not all controversial, but the prophecies that were supposedly given. There were 3, and the first 2 were revealed, and I guess one had to do with some kind of vision of hell. The first one. The second one predicted the end of World War I. And then the third one, Lucia, the young lady, the young girl was told to keep that one secret, which she did until she was finally ordered, I guess, by the bishop to reveal that secret. So she finally did. Now that secret, in its fullness, is not to this day been revealed, and of course there's all kinds of controversy and speculation.
No, they did. It was, she predicted the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul.
Well, yeah, that's supposedly part of it, but that wasn't it in total. Konrad, maybe was the whole thing ever revealed? Because I know that Cardinal Ratzinger at the time said, when it's revealed, it's no big deal. It's not going to predict the future, and it's going to be a big disappointment to everyone because everyone's, basically gotten so psyched up about it. So what do we know about that third secret, and what do you think the purpose of those prophecies were?
Well, I have my own theory, I must say, which is not maybe shared by other people. But my theory is that I would call it maybe simplifying, obviously, the secrets, when you really analyze the secrets, basically the contents, but also the impact of the secrets. And did they help? What they've done to, let's call it, humanity? What was the purpose of it? I find really very difficult to arrive to any important, or let's say, importance of the secrets. So my conclusion was that this was, I call it, a simply sort of type of public relation exercise, because obviously there were many apparitions, before, but when you introduce secrets into some events, media get immediately interested because people are interested. What is behind the secret? So this media, newspapers, and obviously radio and television, and hundreds of books now written on the subject, was not talking about Fatima apparition. They were not talking about display in the sky. Hardly you find much literature on this. But, the whole literature is about the secret. Therefore,
right,
the secrets kept public or media attention all the time. And we're talking about, practically, 100 years after the events, and still people talking about the secrets were true, were disclosed, what was the purpose of it. It is part of, I feel, human nature to focus on any secret. And I think that, for me, personally, it was a clever trick, because it was important that the Fatima event are kept alive, not only, alive within the sort of, call it a religious community, but were really recognized by the wider society. When you read about secrets, you find that non-Christian probably know as much about Fatima secrets as Christian. So I think that was, in my opinion, that was the purpose. And this is, again, I look on Fatima from the sort of project management point of view, and introducing, I call it, public relation exercise, advertising, and keeping in public attention. This was I think, the primary purpose of the secrets. Okay, I might not be, agree with other things, but this is why in my book, obviously, I did not focus much on the secret. Also, I mentioned conversion of Russia. That is something which struck me because it is a prediction. You know, I mean, if we look on whatever happened, it's difficult. You know, obviously the assassination, attempt of assassination of Pope. It's not very clear when you read the secret. It's not very clear that which pope and how will be assassinated. But the statement "conversion of Russia" published in 1942, I found it, you know, as a prediction, I found it just incredible. That's why, again, this is why I find it probably from my point of view the most important part of the secret.
You find it the most important part because it's revealing in its incredibility?
Well, no, because it happened. I mean, you know, this is no, I mean, the saying conversion of Russia.
Right.
You know, and this conversion has happened. We
Yes,
know
that's
that this
true.
happened. That therefore, you know, there is no doubt. And also happened, again, this is why I focus on this in later chapters, because I think it happened. It also was not sort of happened in a sort of simple, natural way. It happened in a very artificial, I find it very mystical way. You know, as a matter of fact, you know, I'm interested in politics and in Russia, and I could not believe, you know, that this, but I think the fall, collapse of communism could happen so quickly and without any reason. You know, there was no, I mean, because I live in sort of communist regime for 25 years, so I understand the operation of the regime, and later on I study the system in Russia. You know, I was quite involved. This is not related to this, to my book. I was just interested how the system operates. And in not only my opinion, but many opinion of many people, you know, the Russia would not collapse on its own and would not be defeated, you know, by war because it was already a superpower. This collapse came as a work of one man. And that is, you know, just incredible how the whole empire could collapse because just one man decided, you know, to make certain movements. And why did he move this? So I think that is a mystery which even Gorbachev was not able to explain to people in a convincing way.
Well, what do you think is at the heart of that? You know, how did it happen so quickly?
Well, this is why I focus on this part, because it happened so quickly. But also, what is strange that Gorbachev was the only person, almost single-handed, sort of caused the destruction of this communist empire. I believe why it was necessary. Again, we have to look into my hypothesis that if I have to go back to Fatima for a moment, that the purpose, obviously, events in Fatima was to save religion in Portugal, because in Portugal in that time was sort of anti-Christian, anti-religious government, which tried to remove religion from the life of people. And they're saying the religion will be removed within sort of 2 generations. So Portugal, life in Portugal, and let's call it a religious life, was in the danger being wiped out well before it was done in Russia. So that was the purpose of the Fatima event, to save Portugal, and it did, as well did very quickly. So what my conclusion was that if extraterrestrial beings try to save Portugal, they obviously try to save human race from some destruction. And Russia, we're not talking about physical destruction, are we talking about development of consciousness, development of human beings? This is what happened, during the last few thousand years, that our level of consciousness slowly increasing. I think we are more conscious people than we were 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Russia was sort of like going backwards. I mean, not going into details. I would say the system. I'm not talking about technology and tech achievements, but we're talking about the level of consciousness, level of development of man, humanitarianism. All this would bring us back to sort of like a barbarian times, back to sort of 5,000 years. So all this work would be destroyed. This is why I believe that extraterrestrials had to act very quickly to remove this threat to the humanity. Because we're not talking about the communists only in Russia. They plan to introduce communists in the whole world. And this is what I was taught. We want to introduce communists in every country in the world. This is our objective. And behind these objectives were obviously many thousands of tanks, nuclear weapons, and so on. So it was not some threat, empty threat. It was threat based by huge military power. And this is why I believe the communists had to be removed from the face of the earth. This type of, let's call it Russian communists.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So those events actually had major impact on the world. It sounds like, small place, Portugal, and, remote from America. We as Americans are so isolated over here. But that really was, had a huge effect at that time. I can see that. But now, what do you conclude as to, what are these extraterrestrials up to now? And now that we're, like nearly, as you said, we're almost 100 years down the road, are they still involved? And do you see evidence of this? And have you now, since coming to these conclusions about the Fatima event, have you now applied the same logic to other events or other things that you've known about?
Yes, I mean that was again, my part of my work, that I started from Fatima because it was something tangible, something which I believe that it really happened. I mean, it was not part of imagination, hearsay, and whatever. I 100% believe that this really was true intervention. And so therefore I came to conclusion, if you have proof, at least one intervention, one activity, without any doubt, this is not just one-off event, therefore must exist in the history of humankind other intervention, other events. Therefore, there must be part of I call it, maybe wrongly, policy or involvement with humankind, that to help to raise, to improve basically humanity, to raise them to higher standard of intelligence and consciousness. So I look into this event which were leading into this direction. And the first event which I started analyzing was the genesis of the first civilizations. And what is not really maybe widely publicized, that the first civilization not only brought to us, let's say, pyramids, temples, nice pictures, but they brought to us new institutions. Sorry, that's more. They introduce humanitarian approach. They introduce justice. They introduce equal rights for men and women. This was so we're not talking about only technology, which is sort of building canals, metallurgy, medicine, astronomy, and so on. It was a leap in the development of human race, and therefore, there was such a big step in the development that there was, up to now, scientists cannot agree how this could happen because it happened suddenly. This again is something which at this moment academics try to avoid, saying, oh, this was an instantaneous almost arrival of this civilization. That it's difficult to believe that how this could happen when the people living at that time, I call it the Neolithic man, was sort of like a very primitive barbarian people. So we're having the first step, which shows that there had to be an intervention. And therefore, I propose that, again, that is bringing us back, to going backwards to Sumer and Egypt, how this civilization arrived, what is the genesis of this civilization. And again, many scientists agree that, as I say, they came from just out of nowhere. They were built by people which arrived to daylight. They arrived, let's say, Sumerians, having sort of very different language, shows that these people arrived from another places. And therefore had to be another place when both civilization have sort of like developed the technology, the sciences, but also the mental development of people. I mean, we're talking about the huge increase in intelligence, which again, at this moment, is supported by some scientists that intelligence and consciousness wasn't really developed slowly, but through evolution, was sort of like a jump in the development of consciousness. This jump could only happen by, well, all the development of human race can happen really in two ways, either by education or by genetic changes. Again, if we talk about education, it's extremely slow process. And also you ask question, who would educate?
That's
if
right.
If you are all on such a low level, how will find this education to start?
Sure.
So therefore this led, that there has to be I call it genetic intervention. And this is why, extraterrestrial had to pass some, I call it intelligence or conscious genes. Maybe this is in an inverted commas.
Right.
But definitely had to happen because it is a huge jump in the human race development.
Yeah. Konrad, we're down to the last minute of the show, and I didn't want to end without letting people know how to get your book. What's the best way to get it?
Well, the book is widely available, well, especially on Amazon.
Amazon.com. Oh, that's great. So
other websites. So just enough to Google or whatever.
Sure.
You are not alone in the universe, and would come out.
Yep. We are not alone in the universe, from the origins of civilizations and religions to humankind's final destiny. That's a lot right there by Konrad Kulczyk. So please look this book up. I'm right in the middle of it right now, and it's really interesting, and I can't wait to get all the way through it. And I was kind of wanting to try to finish it before the show, and then I thought, well, in a way it'll be fun to discover some of the answers on the show. And then now I'm going to go back and reread again what I've already read and then finish the book up. But it's really interesting, and I definitely get your points on on your case. Konrad, there's the music. That means that we are all done. Konrad Kulczyk, thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, please get Konrad's book, We Are Not Alone in the Universe, on Amazon.com. Hope you'll join us again sometime, Konrad. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. See you next week.